where we cautiously agree and where we disagree with the Western campaign against AIDS. Prof. Malik Badri, Malaysia. This is a short commentary in which I should like to briefly put down some of my recent reflections in our Islamic oriented campaign against AIDS in comparison to Western prevention strategies. As I stated in my book, The AIDS Crisis, a natural product of modernity sexual revolution, the Western model of prevention is based on a Western worldview that subscribes to secular humanism as a philosophy of life and democracy as a political system and ideology. In my article, Islamic versus Western medical ethics, a moral conflict or a clash of religiously oriented worldviews, published in FEMA Yearbook 22. I argued that Western modernity strongly holds to this secular worldview as though it were a religion. This is so because historically Europe suffered tremendously under the brutal tyranny of the church. It was only after dethroning religion that Europe was able to develop scientifically and technologically for one to appreciate the extent of animosity that most Western thinkers hold against religion. One can read Bertrand Russell's famous book, Why I'm Not a Christian. It may be useful if I requote his following statement. You find this curious fact that the more intense has been the religion of any period and the more profound has been the dogmatic belief, the greater has been the crudely and the worse has been the state of affairs in the so-called ages of faith. When men really did believe the Christian religion in all its competence, there was the Inquisition with its torture, where there were millions of unfortunate women burned as witches, and there was every kind of cruelty practiced upon all sorts of people in the name of religion. Russell, 1957, 20, quoted by Badri. This fanatic attitude towards religion is what I call it in my above mentioned article on Islamic medical ethics, the religion of irreligiousness. When I discuss religious issues with many Western scholars, I feel that they sound as if they suffer from post-traumatic disorder with respect to religion. Historically, this is the main reason why Westerns, after dethroning the church, practically embraced anti-religious theories such as evolution, psychoanalysis, behaviorism, sociobiology, and ethology. The founders of these theories, like Darwin, Freud, Conrad, Lorenz, and Watson, took the role of prophets and the disciplines. They developed, became like a religion to modernity. As an animal evolving from lower animals, man is just an animal. In pursuing his pleasure, he must not be deterred by religious or other moral codes. He should only avoid harming others and obeying his secular man-made laws. And since there are no divine commandments to stipulate what is halal and what is haram, man himself was crowned as his own God. This briefly is the philosophy that guides the Western model of AIDS prevention. Do what you want with yourself. Be a heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, or bisexual, since this is your own business Only avoid risky groups, use condom, and as much as you can stick to one partner. And if you are an injecting drug user, please you clean syringes. Where we definitely disagree. Now, we as Muslim practitioners fighting AIDS, what can we accept? What should we reject from this model? The point of greatest disagreement is the point of is that our prevention model must be ethically and religiously oriented in the democratic government of the people, by the people, for the people. There is no sacred moral law. The only sanctified moral teaching is what the people want. Abortion, euthanasia, and homosexuality, that were the most detestable sense of Christianity, have been morally detoxified by the majority vote in parliaments. Of course, as Muslims, we cannot touch our main commandments and teachings about what is halal and what is haram. This is unthinkable, even if we get to clear majority in our vote. In fact, it is our adherence to these teachings that made us as Muslim nations have at the least percentage of HIV infection in the world. We should thus reinforce the Islamic Sharia laws against fornication and drug addiction, and find new attractive ways to protect our youth from these evils, such as early commonwealth marriages and some of the methods I have detailed on my above mentioned book on AIDS. It must be stressed that unlike the Western campaign that limits itself to half-hearted external means, our prevention model should adopt an internal approach that combines AIDS awareness with the spiritual and effective Islamic dimensions that moves the heart and influence the mind, and deters by portraying the punishing aspects of sins in this world and the hereafter. We are out to moralize, and we are not ashamed of it if it is the blessed way that changes attitudes. It is only after adapting with Western lukewarm model of prevention in Africa that is exploded like fire in dry hay. And it is only after Dr. Majid Kajimo, the president of the Islamic Medical Association of Uganda, and his blessed colleagues adopted an Islamic prevention campaign, that HIV infection was greatly reduced in all villages in which they conducted their research and work. Their research and work in Uganda. Let me quote what I wrote about the wonderful, blessed work of Kajimo in my book on AIDS, since many readers of this paper may not be familiar with the book. The project was well planned. Our project was titled "The Contribution of Islam to AIDS Prevention in the Uganda Muslim Community." The project was well planned in its use of a hierarchical approach of disseminating Islamically oriented knowledge and attitude changes with respect to a very large sample of the Ugandari Muslim group. The workshop presented a detailed and open discussion on AIDS prevention with the participants. All the district cadets who attended were then requested to discuss what they had learned about Islamically oriented AIDS prevention with all the imams of mosques in their respective districts. The imams would then portray these preventive issues with the Muslim public who came for mass prayers in the mosques or those who needed their services. Imam in Uganda and similar African countries are very influential persons in more education and other social and religious spheres. They teach children and adults and carry out all intimate family functions and ceremonies such as marriages and burials. They are also called upon to counsel they resolve family and other personal problems and scuffle between the tribes and clans. The Islamic Medical Association doctors were perceptive in training these imams in how to combine health education with Islamic teachings. Imams and their assistants were provided with bicycles to help them visit homes and move around their communities, and a material incentive of local hens for rearing there are thousand imams, qadis, and other educators were trained in Islamic AIDS prevention, and about 400 mosques were covered by the project. The positive results of the study were beyond the imagination of its executors. After 2 years, it was found that among those who were exposed to the project, there was a very high statistically significant increase in knowledge of transmission of HIV. Actually, changes in preventive behavior and avoidance of risk practices involving rights such as circumcision and ablution of the dead. There was also a high statistically significant difference in the number of sexual partners and adultery among both male and female groups, such as who are exposed to the project in comparison to those who were not. The concluding statement of Dr. Kajimo, Mrs. Zainab Naduhara, and Dr. Karama said the planners and executors of the project was as follows. We attribute the success of this project to the contribution of Islam. Islam provided the basic administrative structure with voluntary community workers through whom we reached the individuals and families. Islam provided teachings that were supportive of health education. About AIDS prevention, we therefore concluded that Muslim communities should use Islam in their struggle to prevent AIDS. This is Kajimo, word saying by Kajimo in 1996. The success of combating AIDS through an Islamically oriented approach has convinced a number of donors and international agencies in Uganda, such as WHO, World Health Organization, and UNICEF, and UNDP, USAID. One hope or to help expand the project to 8 districts. One hopes that other Muslim countries will follow the example of this dedicated Muslim doctors and educate their imams and religious leaders to shoulder the responsibility of AIDS prevention. Western minded puppets. It is really distressing to find some leading persons in AIDS prevention committees in some Muslim countries who neglect utilizing this spiritually treasure, and some who openly declare that AIDS prevention should not be messed up with with religious issues. I personally know of one such westernized chairman of the AIDS Prevention Committee is one Islamic country who not only speaks for a totally secular prevention strategy but also continuously speaks in televised interviews for the human rights of Muslim homosexuals, bisexuals, and sex workers, prostitutes, as if this were the most important issue in fighting AIDS. Such directors are actually more Western in their thought than the Westerners themselves. They are more royal than the king, so to speak. This is so since, as just mentioned, international AIDS organizations headed by Europeans and Americans have spoken and written so warmly about Kajimo Islamic campaign and supported his project by funds and encouragement. Our Muslim westernized heads of AIDS committees in some Arab and Asian countries are so happily identified with what they superficially believe it in a Western lifestyle that they daily infections and deaths of their citizens from AIDS ceases to worry them. They are afraid that changing the lukewarm model of Western prevention may stamp them personally as reactionaries or backward in this age of ethical globalization and Islamophobia. Some of them are employed by UN health and social agencies. They are afraid to lose status and high salaries of if they openly suggest swimming against the secular currents. As the call of the Islamization of HIV/AIDS prevention intensifies in their countries, one will find that these Western minded puppets would stand by atheists and anti Islamic scholars against those who call for the obvious value of bringing Islam into the battle of fighting AIDS. This is really uh, serious since the Western model is failing in Western countries, importing it without adaptation to our Muslim countries is like transplanting body organs without matching. Adapting Kajimo's model. Adaptations and adjustments of the strategies for fighting AIDS is not only an absolute necessity when importing uh, from west to east, but also from one Muslim country to the other. For example, in Arab and some Asian countries, imams and qadis does not have the power and prestige they hold in African countries like Uganda and Kenya, though they can be very helpful, particularly in rural areas. The model expounded by Kajimo should not be copied without some adjustments. For example, the dynamic help of Islamic movements and youth organizations in Muslim countries that tolerate their activities, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, الجماعة الإسلامية، جماعة جماعة التبليغ and APIM can revolutionize the prevention of HIV/AIDS since young people are more impressed by charismatic leaders and brethrens of the same age. Politically oriented Islamic movements should now appreciate the danger of the AIDS epidemic and should give this issue their time and energy instead of spending all their time in political competitions. For one thing, AIDS is very dangerously spreading in some countries like India, Malaysia, and Sudan. Youth movements and organizations may find themselves losing many of their potential young men and women to this sinister plague if no vaccine or care is discovered for it. What is happening in South Africa and Namibia should be a clear cautionary reminder. Also, the members of such movements and organizations should not limit their efforts to political or social gains if they sincerely seek the pleasure of Allah Almighty, the Almighty. If they succeed in saving potential infections among the youth, then they would be like those who saved the whole of humanity, as the glorious Quran states. ومن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعا. Those that Islamizing AIDS prevention Muslim workers should be creative in seeking the help of community leaders. For example, in Sudan, the leaders and imams of political religious parties and Sufi sheikhs can be of very great assistance. In rural Sudan, tribal chiefs still enjoy much authority and hold a great responsibility to the extent that the central government continuously seeks their help in bringing about peace between fighting groups or in explaining its policies to their followers in disseminating or AIDS awareness and changing the attitudes of their tribes. No community leaders can compare with them. Where we agree with caution and where we tactfully disagree. Let us have a general picture of the population of any country with respect to the possibility of HIV infection first. There is a small group of people who live dangerously and are deaf and dumb to any campaign of AIDS awareness. These are people like prostitutes, drug addicts, and those among homosexual, bisexuals, and even heterosexuals whose sexuality and sexual organs have displaced their brains and rationality. With respect to those who agree with Western as practitioners in opposing them and doing our best to reduce their harm, but we differ in that in the West, the democratic society would generally not allow such walking time bombs to be reprimanded and their evil checked by the strong hand of the law. If this is the way that they want to live, nobody uh, has the right to or the right to prevent them. In most Muslim countries, such persons are punishable by Islamic jurisprudence or by the ethical laws of the land. There is another group composite of those who completely abstain from taking alcohol or drugs and who totally avoid any form of fornication. Both we and Western practitioners are happy with this. The AIDS virus has no way to come near these blessed people, but though we were in agreement that this group serves as the trouble of attitude change and AIDS awareness. We still differ in evaluating their behavior to the average Westerners. These are odd and rather eccentric people, and if they try to breach their clean ways in fighting AIDS, they will be met with aggressive response. I'm not exaggerating. Listen to what I have quoted about Roman Catholic priest who had the courage to openly speak for sexual abstinence. He empathetically and